Good morning. Today I want to share Truth 8 on the spiritual path. This is by far the most important truth of anything in spirituality. We did talk about shadow work in terms of desires, emotions, and thoughts earlier in the path, but this is the step where you actually confront your Hydra, where you actually confront the beast within, and you actually learn to die, which in my model is the purpose of life. So it's Truth 8 and the truth of the shadow. So the law that we're going to cover is the law of gender. And basically the Kybalion states that gender is in everything. Everything in the universe is broken down into 4 elements: fire, air, earth, and water. And basically life is just a math problem. So any sort of conflict, any sort of disease, any sort of imbalance, relationships at work, in your health, in your body, in your mind, is simply an imbalance. You were born with what's called a manas prakriti, or an elemental breakdown of the 4 elements: fire, air, earth, and water. And what happens is right after birth, when we start getting programmed through the subconscious programming from parents and society and culture and school and whatnot, we start to have an imbalance in these elements. And so fire and air are both masculine, and you'll see the triangle upright, and earth and water are feminine elements. So whether it's in astrology or in nature, this is the breakdown of masculine and feminine. And so the law of gender says that gender is in everything. We see this in the yin yang, we see this with the anima and the animus in Jung's theory. And so I have this symbol here that basically, in order to have a balance, it's just finding your balance. There is no universal code. It's not a 48 to 52 or a 50-50. It is based on your mind, on your manas prakriti, on your constitution. For a little bit more on the manas prakriti and the constitution, you can look to the Vedas. Specifically, Ayurveda speaks to this a lot. I speak more about the spiritual makeup. And when I work with clients, specifically in relationships, and my truth is in the triangle model, we look at the elemental breakdown. In a moment, we'll do an activity. And this is an activity that you can do for the job that you want, the partner that you want, the home that you want, the health that you want. If you could just sort your definition of what you want your elements to look like, your distribution, you can sort of, create your own design of the elements and then attract that into your life. So basically life is just a math problem. You've been given this gender or this elemental breakdown in masculine and feminine. And again, this has nothing to do with sexuality, just energy. And life taught you that you couldn't be that way. And so we learn to compensate or overcompensate. So for instance, in my astrology chart, which is probably the easiest way to get your breakdown, I have no earth or very little earth. So I obviously overcompensate with earth in my life in terms of eating earthly foods, dating an earthly partner, having a lot of earthly friends, and implementing the earth element into my life. Once I understood that the earth element for me was structure, boundaries, and a routine and a schedule, then I stopped chasing the unhealthy version of the earth element, which was the financial compensation or overcompensation and working a lot and seeking the money. So it's just basically a math problem. So in your astrology chart, on the 10 main planets, from the moon, sun, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, will have an elemental breakdown. Those 10 will tell you at birth what your breakdown is. The one that is overcompensated, let's say you have a lot, 6 of fire and 0 of water, or 2 of water and 8 of earth. Whatever imbalance is, you're going to live your life trying to balance that out unhealthily unless you understand your elemental breakdown and start living in that balance. And that's sort of like the process of learning to die. And we'll talk about the myth of the Hydra. So we're kind of talking about law of gender in terms of death as well, because the only way to get to your shadow, the only way to die so that you can live your purpose and go back to your manas prakriti or your balance is by killing off the overcompensation or the hydra heads that you're trying to overcompensate with that you don't want to see, which is your shadow, so that you can get back to your true self. And these are programs, subconscious programs, so that we're not living a true life, and rather we're living the unlived life of the parents, which is ultimately the shadow. So what happens with the law of gender, if you've ever seen the caduceus is the two snakes that go up the sushumna, the spinal column, that create the chakras. In the sixth chakra, which is the third eye, it becomes Ouroboros. The serpent becomes whole, and the serpent is eating its tail. This is the idea of balance. This is the idea of wholeness based on your elemental structure, on you identify what your beast or hydra heads are that you need to sort of kill. And I'll share with you astrologically so you can see that on your chart. So the eighth labor is Hercules and the Lernaean Hydra. And like all of the Hercules myths, when he got to that gate, the teacher gave him some wise counsel. So basically he said 9 heads. So the Hydra has 9 heads, and one of them is immortal. That immortal head is your key to your wholeness and your self-love. The others need to be transmuted. Prepare to battle with this loathsome creature, this loathsome beast. Think not that common means will serve. If you try the truth of shadow with all other techniques and spirituality that you have tried, you will fail. This is an obsessive look at your thoughts, the impurity of the thoughts, the desires and the emotions that you are having a psychological orgasm owning because you learned in childhood was what you needed to do to get what I call your Costco card membership of love. Unconditional love, your needs not met, and you perpetuate your life story, your upper limits, your limiting beliefs. That's why we have to dethrone our parents. We're dethroning the limiting beliefs that they imposed upon us, willingly or unwillingly. And if we go about the same strategy, we will never get to the light. We will never bring the shadow to the light, which is the whole point. So everything you've done thus far is to get you to this space, to get comfortable enough with the hard, dirty truths that everything that you consider good about yourself has been self-serving. Everything that you consider good that you've done in the world has been to cover up maybe a bad thought or an impure thought. So we cannot use the same means. And so transformation no longer works here. This is not a behavior change. This is transmutation. Transmutation is a belief change. Without a belief change, the Hydra will continue to rule your life. The other thing that the teacher said, one word of counsel only I may give, the teacher said, we rise by kneeling. This is really about getting into humility and surrendering to the truth of your low-level consciousness, of the beast that you are, of the orgasm that you get from pain and suffering. We have got to get real. Go forth, O Son of God and Son of Man, and conquer. And then he entered the 8th gate. So the Hydra has 9 heads. In this Alice Bailey version, she breaks them down as sex, comfort, money, fear, hatred, desire for power, pride, separateness, and cruelty. And it's been said in many ways. Hinduism has the Shadripus, Jainism has the thieves, and Christianity has the sins, Aristotle has the vices, and she uses the term vice, and we often see the virtue as the other side. Enneagram as well has the vices. And so the idea is that we have all of these heads of the Hydra. In my model, I identify with clients the one main head that keeps them from even seeing the other heads. So when we start engaging in that TED Talk, Is it mother, father? What don't I like about it? That judgments are confessions and they're a great concept. And what does it prove about me? Every time we do that thought, we get to one thought, one emotion, and one desire that we're trying to hide. So in my book, The 7 Gates, I talk about 7 gates with 7 doors within each gate. It's related to these Hydra heads. So if you don't get to the point about you being a narcissist or prideful or vain or envious, whatever your sort of main thought that keeps coming up in that TED Talk, then you'll never be able to get to any of the other Hydra heads. So you're going to see that there's one main one when I show you in the astrology chart, and I broke it down by sign, but we have all of them. So we all have some passion, and sex is a vehicle for creation. So it's necessary, but we have to manage that sexual appetite so that we can use that energy for higher creativity. Comforts. So this is linked like close to sloth. This is not about not having money or greed or not having a day off and hard work. It has to do with striving for spiritual betterment. And I'll show you my spiritual scoreboard that's going to help you develop your astral body and literally die when you leave the physical world. So you're learning to die in terms of killing the Hydra heads, but you're not solely learning to die in this lifetime. You're also learning how to get out of the physical body by detaching from your thoughts, emotions, and desires. And remember what the teacher said, you cannot cut off one head of the Hydra because 2 will grow back. This means you cannot hide it. You cannot pretend. You cannot suppress. The only way to work these Hydra heads, the shadow, is to bring it to the light. Money, we often associate with greed. So it's not only, of course, material wealth, which is absolutely necessary, but the riches of the spiritual mind. We'll see this in Truth 9, the truth of wisdom and mentorship, that once you identify your Hydra and you've learned something on your journey, it's your responsibility to teach it, to spread that message. Passions, she links to the emotions, fear, hatred, desire for power. One of the things I do with clients is I invite them to think about why they're doing what they're doing. So for instance, I had a client yesterday whose son is autistic, and she's creating a retirement home for older autistic and special needs children because she's getting older in age and wants to make sure that her son has a safe space that he can live in his older years when she's gone. So of course, on the surface, in the earthly consciousness, this is a wonderful thing she's doing. She's meeting a need for herself and for others. But I invite her to look at the possibility. Could she tolerate the thought? Could she tolerate that what she's doing is finding a safe space for him to live so that she can indeed seek the life that she wants, which now she's retired, she's wealthy, she wants a partner, and she wants to travel. So we have to be willing to go beyond what we think we're thinking. It's a little uncomfortable. Also, the emotions. And we have one preferred emotion. During the pregnancy months, your mother felt a certain way. She could have been worried about the pregnancy. She could have felt hopeless about her professional endeavors now that she was getting pregnant. There's one overriding emotion that is sent repeatedly through the amniotic fluid. This shows up as our moon sign. This shows up as our conditional version of love that we seek in relationships. But there's also that one emotion that we keep going back to with that TED Talk. So I learned mine was hopelessness. If I could prove I was unworthy, that I was worthless, then I would feel hopeless. And that was me honoring my mother and her love, the conditional love I learned in the womb. So identifying what your preferred emotion is also going to understand how you use your power currency. It's self-destructive at the end of the day, but we want to live with our heart. And so we can't get there until we start owning the truth of our emotions. And then the third section that she does is the mental. So she does physical, emotional, and mental in terms of the 3 bodies of man. And she says that the vices of the lower mind are pride, separateness, and cruelty. So pride is the ego and separateness is the ego. These are linked to the personality. In Truth 5 of ego, personality, and soul, I explained to you at a very young age, we develop an ego and personality. It's necessary. However, what happens if we never leave that honey pot, if we never sort of wipe off that diamond of honey and individuate, what is always dictating our mind is our ego and our personality. It's the same thing as trying to overcompensate for the missed element. In my case, earth, so I sought after the low-level consciousness of greed and wealth and money. Again, doesn't mean that that's bad or that I've changed my interest in accumulating wealth. It means that I balance those energies and realize that the healthier, the higher mind earth element comes with boundaries, with structure, with limitations, with a schedule, with consistency. So this is part of that math problem. The separateness has to do with the ego and the personality. If you allow that to lead your life, then your divine will, your purpose is really never served. It's the same archetype of Mars, of the planet Mars, but it's a very different when you're directed by your soul and your soul's purpose and your will than your separateness and ego and personality. This is also part of the pain that we feel. We feel lonely and separate from others because we've yet to understand that we are all one. We fail to understand that every judgment is a confession, that everything is the law of correspondence mirroring back to ourselves. When we start this balance, the law of gender kicks in, our masculine and feminine energies, and our preferred balance creates wholeness. And now we're seeing one, the third eye, all is mind, all is one. So here, eventually, and that's why the teacher said we gain by kneeling, has to do with learning humility and compassion. We cannot use the heart chakra, the fourth chakra, unless we've conquered the second chakra, the erotic passions, the deadly sins, the shadripus, the vices. It's impossible. You cannot skip a step. So I have a theory of tribal narcissism and transcendental narcissism. Tribal narcissism are those of us that live in the lower chakras, the first and second, in terms of greed or wealth or accumulation, or perhaps hurting others or being, assholes overtly. And then those of us that live in the divine light or the positive vibes only, or into social justice. And then we have burnout because we're trying to live from the heart when we haven't developed our lower chakras. So my guides say we're either spirit, so these higher chakras looking for matter, that's where I was and what Cancer helped me with, get in the body, or we're matter seeking spirit, which is the majority of people in the Western world, where our focal point is on material gain or earthly vices. And then eventually, when we hit some sort of downtrodden or grief cycle, we seek spirit, we speak something in the more universal consciousness, but we're always moving in one direction. And the seatbelt is the third chakra. The seatbelt is the fire element, the transmutation element. What Hercules did is that he entered the swamp and he confronted the Hydra. He could not cut off one head of the Hydra because two would grow back. That's when you're trying to suppress. Up until now, you haven't really been that honest with yourself. You might be looking at yourself, you might develop some intuitive skills, but you haven't really understood that everything that enters your sphere of consciousness is you. You really haven't understood that everything that is the law of correspondence is about you. And you really haven't understood that there is no other, that everything is a projection of your shadow, your unprocessed emotion, your unintegrated parent. This step is to get you to that level of awareness about yourself to begin the integration process of your shadow aspects. So the two Hydra head metaphor is the suppression, is the ignoring, is doing the opposite of mom and dad, or opposite of what you're judging. So you judge someone lazy, you're excessively hardworking, your Hydra is sloth, for instance. and you're trying to hide the fact that you're lazy, oftentimes it's linked to spiritual laziness. But that's the way that this works, and finding that 48 to 52, that midpoint we spoke about in Truth 7. So what happens is he goes with his handy dandy club and he realizes that the only way that he can actually kill the Hydra heads is to transmute the Hydra head. So he sets the club on fire and he severs the head with fire. The fire element we will see repeatedly throughout metaphor, metaphysics, symbol, alchemy, is the only symbol that is transmuted. That's why Prometheus was punished by the gods, because he brought the humans the element of fire, and it wasn't because of cooking and keeping us warm. It was because it symbolically means we're able to transmute the Hydra heads. And if the closer we get to transmutation of our shadow, the closer we are to becoming gods and not incarnating again. And they didn't want any more gods on Olympus. So these are the 9 Hydra heads as per Alice Bailey. You can go, like I said, to the Enneagram, to Ethics by Aristotle. You can go to any of the religions has a version. In my book, The 7 Gates, I have a chart of a bunch of the different shadow aspects. In my model, when we go through the spiritual striptease, this is the work we do. We first thought would start with the spiritual TED Talk, obsessing about what thoughts keep coming up. Then we go to spiritual STD, where we start saying, thinking, and doing the same, so that we start with the unification of the energies. But in the spiritual striptease is when you get very down and dirty. And in every mythology, it's a process. It's the process of alchemy, of lead to gold. This is not done overnight. This is the purpose of life. But you cannot live in these higher chakras of compassion and empathy and love if you have not confronted your shadow, at least in the 2nd chakra, your passions and eros, and transmuted those. So why is the purpose of life to learn to die? Well, this is the image of the Nigredo. The Nigredo is the light and dark aspects of self when they get married, that we talked about last, truth in the mystical marriage. We have to own our dark and our light in order to be whole, in order to be balanced, the truth of balance. So here again, I bring the Hieros Gamos, or the Vesica Pisces, and I talk to you about the elements. And that's why the book is The Truth is in the Triangle. It doesn't matter what your relationship looks like, romantic or otherwise, but that particular book is about the romance. It's the mystical marriage with self, your balance of your elements. So you need your fire and air elements are your upward triangle. They represent the penis, or the masculine element, and the feminine, or the vagina, is always represented in alchemy with the downward triangle, and it's water and air. And in a moment, we'll do an activity so that you can start defining your own elemental breakdown. So this is in the center, the mandorla. This is the holy passage. This is the vagina. Your mother's vagina, when you come through the birth canal, is the same vagina, not physically, metaphorically, that you go in to go through to the universal consciousness, to enter the universal womb. So in the Bible, Jesus speaks about rebirth. And Nicodemus is like, well, how can I get rebirth? I cannot enter my mother's vagina again, or my mother's womb. And he's like, you have to birth yourself of yourself. Throughout life, what you are doing is creating an astral body. So when I read those that have crossed over, I am reading the person's astral body. Sometimes it comes in very dense and you can see actual physical structures of the person, but usually it's like a shadow form with some aspects that perhaps the spirit wants me to see. But what I'm connecting with is the astral body. Every time we confront our Hydra, every time we integrate, every time we do something spiritual or healthy for self, we are creating a stronger astral body. So one of the things I tell people is you can live by societal norms, but you cannot die metaphorically by societal norms. If you are living for society, you do not create an astral body. Your astral body is very thin and weak because what you're doing is you're looking for moral and conventional morality, people to say you're a good girl or a good boy. You're doing what you're told, you're checking off a checklist. So I have a client who on paper has done it all right. She married the right guy, had the right kids, the kids did it well, she's a great grandparent, she's financially well off, she donates to charity, she volunteers in the library, in the politics, and she takes her vacation, she does yoga, she on paper does it all right. But her spiritual scoreboard is this small. All of that is living by society, by living by illusion, by what society dictates is good. And so her astral body is not balanced. This is what we want, like I told you last truth. Spirit and matter, masculine, feminine. Again, it does not mean that your elements have to be balanced in the masculine and feminine. It's your balance that you were born with. So these triangles, when you are balanced and you're living a 48 to 52 life, yes, you have to live to certain societal norms, that covert power currency, and go to the party that you may necessarily want to go. This is after you get very solid in your individuation process, in your spiritual STD, not before. So remember, this is on the way to the spiritual striptease, when now we're getting very honest with our shadow and ourself. When you create a balanced spirit and matter, when you create a balanced masculine and feminine in terms of your chart, when you start balancing work and play, so outcome versus no outcome, letting go, surrender, your holy passage for your astral body is appropriate. You basically re-enter the cosmic consciousness, the womb, healthily. These are people that have detached. These are people that have learned to die repeatedly throughout life with their skinny cows and their Saturn cycles. These are people that die with ease. However, if your life, as most of us are, spiritual scoreboard looks like this, look at the tiny mandorla opening that your astral body is going to have to go through. You're going to suffer upon your death. That's why the purpose of life is learning to die. Detachment from the cusp of the 8th house in astrology, detachment from transmutation of limiting beliefs into higher belief systems, from your hydra heads, bringing those shadow aspects to the light, and to stop living a lie and living in truth. This is the crux of any spiritual tradition. It's why Jesus resurrected. He was having an exchange of a value system. We see this in the 2-8 axis in astrology. We see this in the Hanged Man in tarot. This is the lesson of spirituality. Without learning how to die, detach from whatever that is, you have not died. Your astral body will be weak and brittle. Your scoreboard is uneven, and you're going to have difficulty upon exiting your life. I told you before that in the subconscious model, the 3rd stage, which is how you enter the world, your pregnancy story, needs to be rewritten to die a better death. And all of those skinny cows, all of those Saturn cycles, hopefully just Saturns, you may have a Pluto here and there that will fast track you into death. You're detaching from that story. I have a lot of people that were born during that generation where women were numbed and they entered the world numb. So there's a tendency to be spiritual sloths because they entered with ease and they overwork and they're hard workers, thinking that in their psyche they're compensating. I entered without anesthesia. I flew out. I almost fell on the floor. I have transitioned into every stage of my life like that until cancer said, no, this has to be rewritten. So that's an indicator. If you don't really know where to start, go to your birth story, what you know about your birth into the world. And it's not doing the opposite, because the opposite's the same, but doing it differently. And your elemental breakdown will teach you that. Your elemental breakdown will explain a balance of your energies of how to start managing those transitions into life. And ultimately, that will teach you to detach, confront your Hydra, kill your Hydra head, transmute the Hydra head actually, and balance your spiritual scoreboard so that your energies and your astral body have a balanced holy passage in which to go through. So when it's said that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were a couple, it's a metaphorical, I don't know about the physical story, but it's a metaphorical story of masculine and feminine, of divine and human. And she was the prostitute. The sex archetype is also found in the death archetype, across mythology, across symbology. And it has to do, again, with this holy passage or the vaginal opening, not necessarily with sex, although sex is when something destroys, we want to naturally create, but we want to create at a higher vibration, which is what Alice Bailey was referring to in terms of the transmutation of the Hydra heads. So currently, your spiritual scoreboard probably looks like this. So let me address something that's very important for the spiritual community. A lot of people believe that going on retreats and doing yoga and meditating and having crystals and singing bowls is spiritual. And they'll be like, Frances, my spiritual is bigger than my matter. Well, it's still in balance, so it doesn't work, but it's not actually true. Your matter has to do with anything that takes up space. So what takes up space? When I ask people this, they usually say, well, my body and my things. We are programmed to only believe that something that takes up space is our body or the earth element, what we can see. Again, it's the form and illusion that we learned about in Truth 3. It isn't true. The thing that takes up more space than absolute anything is our thoughts and our emotions. So the desires are seen in the body or felt and experienced in the body in that earth element. But what about the thoughts and what about emotions? Thoughts are air, emotions are water. You've got the body that's earth, and it's the transmutation of fire that transmutes thought, emotion, desire. So you may not have accumulated things and you say, well, I don't have things, but you have been a glutton and very greedy with your thoughts and your emotion. If you want to hear more about that, I have Dethroning Greed video on my YouTube channel, where failure to set limits, failure to set boundaries, failure to self-love, self-betrayal, failure to say no, failure to have a spiritual STD, all of those things are building your matter column, because then you're not detached from your thoughts and emotions. You may be detached from the earthly things, but your thoughts and emotion are taking up the space. So most people, even if they're doing spiritual activities, that still goes in the matter column. So I have a client who does an extreme amount of retreats and events, and she considers those spiritual. They're not, they're lustful. She's lusting a spiritual experience, does not make that a spiritual scoreboard column. I have another client who runs a spiritual podcast. That's work. Just because the topics are spiritual doesn't mean it goes into the spirit column. The shadow work, the balance of our energies is the only thing that creates a mandorla, a holy passage of balance, builds the astral body, and helps us detach easier in this lifetime upon the final transition out of the body. So here's a ceremony coming out in Witch Bitch 2 that'll be out next year. If you haven't gotten Witch Bitch 1, it's full of ceremonies and rituals, and I highly recommend it. So Witch Bitch 2, this is one of the ceremonies, and it's the Grim Reaper ceremony. So the materials you'll need is a picture like this one of the Grim Reaper, a picture of Cupid or Eros or any version of passion that you identify passion with, and a stack of bones. If you want to use chicken bones and real bones, that's fine. If not, you can just print out a picture of bones. Remember, the subconscious is all symbolic, so it doesn't matter if it's real, materialized, or it's just an image in some form. So basically on top of the Grim Reaper picture, you're going to place your bones, your stack of bones. You can take 5, 10, 15, whatever you're drawn to, 9 if you want to have one for each Hydra head. Each time you engage in a behavior of self-love, you're going to take one of the bones and place it on top of the picture of Eros or Cupid or whatever you represent as passion. Why? Because unless you learn to love your Hydra heads that are in the second chakra, which is known as Aphrodite pandemia, Eros, passionate love, sexual pleasures, desires of the flesh, all of those impure thoughts, you cannot confront or defeat the shadow or the Hydra heads. So we have to place them in the passion column, identifying that self-love is indeed self-serving, and we are not serving absolutely anybody just yet. That doesn't come until Aphrodite Urania, which is after we learn to love ourselves fully. When you engage in a self-destructive behavior or a behavior considered to be self-betrayal, I like that better. Self-betrayal is when you say, think, or do opposite of what you really wanted to do. So if you wanted to be a jerk and you wanted to be selfish and you wanted to honor your Hydra and you didn't, you were trying to cover up an impure thought with a good behavior, to cover up a bad thought. That is considered self-betrayal. You take one of the bones, you put it right back on the Grim Reaper. And you can set a timeline to do this, to kind of see. I like a period of a week or even a month. Start on the new moon, cycle it through, and see the 29-day cycle and see sort of how you build. And that's going to be representative of the cycle for you. Remember that in order for the assignment to be done correctly, you must be extremely honest with yourself and open with your emotions to determine what is considered to be an act of self-betrayal. Only you are the determiner of that. Death happens in silence. These experiences happen in silence. I'll tell clients all the time, lie to your friends and your family, but you do not lie to yourself, and I won't let you lie to yourself, and hence the purpose of the work together. So this is something that's done very privately as you defeat your Hydra head and you start to really own the quality of your thoughts and what your thoughts and desires and emotions really are. So your elemental breakdown, there's 2 ways to do this. You can go to your astrology chart and take those 10 planets and find your balance of air, water, earth, and fire. I like this activity for attracting a partner, a job, or understanding myself. So earth and water, I told you the downward triangles, they're the feminine. And what characteristics do you identify in your life to be feminine? Are you emotional? Is it stable? Stable is earth, emotion is water, loyal is earth, intuitive is water. And then the same for fire and air that are masculine. Air is curious, fun is fire, impulsive is fire, communicative is air. And it could be shadow and light. Don't only put light, but be very honest in terms of what characteristics you have in your life that really are air, earth, fire, and water, so you can see what you think that you are. So you might think you're very, very stable, but let's say you're a big partier, which again, there's nothing wrong with this. That's a fire, that's not an earth element. So you can have both and get very honest with your elemental inventory in terms of your characteristics that you believe that you have. Most of these are going to be ego and personality. What are you really doing in terms of your soul's purpose, in terms of your will, from an elemental breakdown? So in the astrology chart, the 8th house cusp, it's hardly, you can see here, but mine's in Cancer. Here's one word that speaks to the Hydra head or the shadow aspect that must die. Every single thing on your spiritual path will link back to that sign. Do not think that you have more than one characteristic that has to die repeatedly, repeatedly, repeatedly through your lifespan. In this life, you were given that one. So for instance, mine is dependence, emotional dependence primarily. It's in the 8th house. It hasn't been for me financial, but there have been relationships where finances are the way that I financed my love and my emotional dependence. So if you do know astrology, you can go a step further. And of course, if there's planets in there, like mine has the moon, so of course it exacerbates the theme. But just with the sign on the cusp, that is sufficient for you to see what has to die repeatedly, which Hydra head. And what you could do is you can find your particular word and link it back to one of the 9 heads, or the vices, the sins, or the Shadrupas. So for instance, Aries impulsivity, that would be anger or wrath as a cardinal sin. And lastly, ask yourself, where has your beast, your Hydra head, served you? We have something that I call the psychological orgasm. There is an impure thought that enters the space, let's say upon judgment, that links to an emotion. So for instance, I am ugly and fat and unlovable. My emotion was hopelessness, and my self-betrayal behavior was to self-destruct my body. So I had an eating disorder, or I chose the same bad partners, or I made really bad food choices. I tried to overcompensate by getting a license in dietetics, becoming a dietitian, eating well, studying food and nutrition, but I could not integrate until I really owned that I was trying to prove, again, it's all subconscious, my parents right. In this particular case, my unintegrated shadow parent is my mom. Vanity was a big shadow aspect for her, and I wanted to reject the fact that I was vain. So I would repeatedly, and my lacking element is earth, would self-destruct in the earth element of my body. So see where this is serving you. When you identify your orgasm, your impure thought, your emotion, and your behavior, this is what you want to die. And you're doing this because you want to have that Costco card membership of your family for your conditional version of love and not getting your needs met. You like this, and somewhere it has served you. So that's all I have for today. This is the crux of spirituality. I really, really hope that this helps you. Please check out my YouTube channel. I have tons of videos on this, and shout out if you have any questions, you can contact me. Have a great day.